Look at the iconic images of the First World War. The mud of Flanders, the dreadnoughts of Jutland, the fresh-faced American doughboys arriving in 1917 to make the world safe for democracy. This is the history we know. A united America tipping the scales for the Allies. But what if the stage for that war was completely different? What if when the guns of August sounded in 1914, there wasn't one American republic to call upon, but two? And what if these two rival Americas didn't just watch from across the Atlantic, but chose opposite sides? By 1914, more than 50 years after a successful Confederate bid for independence, North America is divided. To the north stands the United States of America, industrialized, progressive, and tightly linked to the economies of Britain and France. To the south lies the Confederate States of America, agrarian, traditionalist, and dominant across the Gulf of Mexico. They are not allies, they are rivals, locked in a tense armed peace, their border the most fortified line in the Western Hemisphere. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated and Europe slides toward war, Washington and Richmond don't see a distant conflict, they see opportunity. For the United States, the logic is immediate. Its closest ally for 2 generations has been Great Britain. American banks, factories, and trade networks are intertwined with London and Paris. Imperial Germany, with its massive army and authoritarian system, is viewed as a natural partner of the Confederacy. For American planners, the coming war offers a chance to weaken the Confederacy as most powerful international supporter and force a settlement favorable to U.S. dominance. For the Confederate States, the calculation is equally clear. Britain remains the historic enemy, remembered for its crippling naval blockade. Germany, by contrast, is a rising challenger to the Anglo-French world order. Its military efficiency is admired in Richmond. By aligning with the Central Powers, the Confederacy sees a path to break British control of Atlantic trade, protect its Caribbean empire, and indirectly humble its northern rival. German unrestricted submarine warfare begins sinking merchant ships, supplying the Allies, including vessels flying the U.S. flag. In Washington, this is framed as barbarism. In Richmond, it's praised as decisive German strength. At the same time, the British Royal Navy expands its blockade and begins seizing Confederate cotton ships, accusing them of indirectly supplying the enemy. In the South, this is seen as open economic warfare. Diplomatic tensions escalate rapidly. Ultimatums are exchanged. In the spring of 1916, the final lines are crossed. The United States declares war on the German Empire. Almost simultaneously, the Confederate States declare war on the British Empire. By extension, France is drawn in. The Great War is no longer centered only on Europe. It becomes a true world war. For the first time, the Western Front has a hostile and divided American continent behind it. The United States mobilizes on an enormous scale, but its effort is divided. Millions of men are drafted, and a massive American expeditionary force begins training for deployment to France. U.S. industry shifts into overdrive, producing rifles, artillery, and aircraft for the Allied cause. Yet the United States cannot commit everything overseas. A vast share of its manpower and resources is locked along the southern border. The standing army swells to garrison the fortified frontier. The U.S. Navy's first responsibility is not troop convoys, but coastal defense, hunting Confederate raiders, and enforcing a blockade of southern ports. The Confederate war effort is smaller, but sharply focused. Its priority is not the trenches of Europe, but control of the sea. Richmond declares its central objective to be freedom of the seas. The Confederate Navy, built around German-designed commerce raiders, launches a coordinated assault on British shipping. Working in parallel with German U-boats, Confederate forces aim to choke Britain's supply lines across the Atlantic and Caribbean. On land, Confederate strategy is defensive. Large forces man entrenched border defenses, daring the United States to attempt costly offensives. Confederate leaders believe that if Britain can be weakened at sea and U.S. forces tied down at home, Germany will prevail in Europe. The first shots of the American front are not fired in France. They are fired on the open water, in the Gulf of Mexico and off the Atlantic coast, as two rival Americas enter the First World War on opposite sides of history. The war in the Atlantic transforms overnight from a fight against submarines into a sprawling naval nightmare. The Confederate surface raiding fleet, built around fast long-range cruisers, slips past distracted British patrols and disappears into the world's shipping lanes. They are not seeking decisive fleet battles. They are hunters. British coal carriers from Australia burn at sea. Argentine grain ships bound for France are sunk. Insurance rates for Atlantic shipping explode, and London is forced to pull vital warships away from the North Sea to hunt Confederate raiders, weakening Britain's main fleet against Germany. At the same time, the United States Navy imposes a total blockade of the Confederate coastline, a modern version of the Anaconda Plan. But this confederacy is no longer isolated. Caribbean oil and access to Latin American markets keep vital supplies moving. A deadly game of cat and mouse unfolds in the Florida Straits and the Yucatan Channel as Confederate blockade runners clash with U.S. destroyers. On land, a strange and unsettling stalemate takes hold. While Europe bleeds in trenches, two enormous armies face one another across barbed wire, minefields, and concrete fortifications. There are raids, artillery exchanges, and occasional aerial skirmishes, but no major offensives. Both sides understand that any full-scale invasion would be catastrophically costly. The American front becomes a phantom war, consuming men and material without decisive movement, draining both nations of strength. This stalemate has devastating consequences for the wider conflict. The United States, which in our history became the arsenal that saved the Allies, is now overextended. It must arm itself, Britain, France, and Russia, while fighting a massive naval war and maintaining a continental defensive line. The strain is overwhelming. Rifles, artillery shells, and trucks meant for Europe are instead diverted to border fortresses. The flood of American manpower and material that tipped the balance in 1918 is reduced to a trickle. In Europe, the effects are immediate. When Germany launches its great offensive in 1918, the situation is radically different. Allied armies are exhausted, undersupplied, and still waiting for American reinforcements that arrive in far smaller numbers. German advances go deeper, defensive lines bend and, in some sectors, threaten to break. Morale falters as British and French soldiers realize the relief they expected may never fully come. The Confederate contribution, though largely naval, proves decisive. By 1917, shipping losses reach crisis levels. Britain faces real shortages at home. Political pressure mounts to either seek a negotiated peace or redeploy massive naval forces away from Europe to deal with the American theater. The balance of the war begins to tilt. By late 1918, exhaustion grips the world, but the outcome is no longer clear-cut. The war ends not with total collapse, but with a harsh, negotiated peace. The Central Powers avoid complete defeat. Germany does not face the same level of humiliation or absolute surrender. The peace settlement is bitter, but not crushing. The Confederate States achieve their central objective, recognition as a global power. They secure guarantees of trade rights and the end of British interference in their shipping. Their role in breaking British naval dominance is undeniable. The United States emerges deeply frustrated. It has fought a global war and defended a continent at the same time, spending enormous resources for limited results. It gains no clear victory and no territorial reward. The dream of immediate global leadership dies. The American century never begins. The aftermath reshapes the world. Britain and France emerge weakened and resentful, blaming their struggles on the absence of full American support. Germany is battered but intact, its ambitions checked rather than destroyed. The Confederate States are emboldened, their rigid social and political system validated by success. The United States retreats inward, marked by bitterness, isolationism, and economic strain. The war that was meant to end all wars does not. Instead, it sets the stage for a 20th century defined by rivalry across the Atlantic and deep division within North America itself. The central question of the age is no longer the fight against fascism, but the consequences of two rival Americas that fought their First World War on opposite sides and now prepare, knowingly or not, for a second. Thanks for watching. What alternate history scenario should we explore next? Let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe for more.